Same here.
I'm
Hadi,
audible.
Yes,
I
yes.
can be
yes,
hi.
yes.
Rami's
So
online
We can
hi.
see
YouTube
hands
चालू कर
shake.
दीजिए. Thank
Very
you.
Yeah,
well. Thank
yeah.
you.
We're on
Just
YouTube
to
now.
yeah, I just want to ask, how will I present my screen? Share
Share
screen,
screen.
no?
Share screen.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'll
Okay.
help you. Don't worry.
Okay. Okay. Sure.
You've sent your PPT, so it's not a cause of worry at all.
Yeah, but just where to change the
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, we'll be there.
Hi, Yogesh. Hi, Yogesh.
So, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Anandini Dar, Assistant Professor at the School of Education Studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. And I welcome you all to this very first sort of webinar that is focused on ethics in particular, which we have titled, What is Ethical Research? We've brought this webinar together as part of the working group that has been associated with the Research and Consultancy Division at AUD, along with the Center for Research Methods at Ambedkar University, Delhi. This has been co-organized by myself and Dr. Sonalini Kumar, as well as the support of all the working group colleagues who are here with us today. And, just a brief about background as to why we're hosting this webinar on what is ethical research. Of course, the title of it suggests a very rudimentary sort of engagement with the idea of research and the concept of ethics. But we wanted to sort of start right at the beginning, given that we have a new ethics research policy at AUD, which means that there will be a certain kind of certification now required anytime we bring in a research project. So if we start any kind of research project engaged with human subjects, we have to get a prior approval, an institutionalized approval and a certification for the same. However, we want to think more critically about these issues around certification as well to go beyond just the politics of signing and writing things down, but think through what and where does research begin? Where does the idea of ethics begin? Can it begin prior to conceptualizing what we want to interrogate, what we want to study? And which is why we have got today three excellent, fantastic speakers who have a very long history of conducting research in social sciences field. And before I introduce the speakers, I would like to give the baton to our Dean of the Research and Consultancy Division, Professor Geeta Venkatraman, to tell us a little bit about the Research and Consultancy Division first, and then we'll proceed. So Geeta, please join us.
Myself, sorry. Um, Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Anandini. And I just want to take a very, very short amount of time to tell you a little bit about the Research and Consultancy Division that we have at Ambedkar University, Delhi. It's again like the ethics review draft and so on that we have finalized. The Research and Consultancy Division is also rather new. We've just been in existence for a little over a year, and it it's not that research was not going on in the university before that, or that projects were not being approved and so on, but it was being done through an advisory committee, and the university felt rightly so that it's a very important aspect of the university and that we needed a dedicated division to look after research and consultancy related issues. So what does our division do? Of course, there is all kinds of permissions and, all projects have to come through the division and so on. But I think its main focus and the thing that is dearest to, I think, my heart and that of the working group is that we should be able to create an enabling atmosphere in the university for people to do research. And we are all academics, and research is at the heart of what we do. In fact, every time we teach, we get teaching and research are intertwined and cannot really be separated. even when you're teaching at the undergraduate level, there are times when research questions come out of it. And conversely, when you're working on research, there are things that you feel even undergraduates can get a sense of. So research is absolutely at the heart of everything that we do. And I think ethics is at the heart of research. Even though there is certification and so on that needs to be done now, I think when you conceive of a research project, particularly when it involves human beings and it involves living creatures, it's absolutely essential that right at the time when you're thinking about your research project or what you want to do, ethics have to be organically there with that thinking. It cannot come at a later stage when, because you have to get a certification, you end up thinking about that question. It should be part of our thinking process right from the beginning. And I think we are making attempts, not just as a university, but as academics to do this. And I think also that many of our authority bodies like the UGC and so on have also started making a lot of inroads towards ensuring that ethics is something which is research scholars are exposed to. So they have done it in their own way, but I think that's what it earmarks is that it's an extremely important issue for all of us. And so with this, I would hand over the baton back to Anandini, and she's going to ask our co-organizer in this event to speak now. Thank you.
Thank you, Geeta, for setting the context of our division. I do now move on to introduce Professor Babu Ramesh. He is the director of the newly Christianed division called Center for Research Methods at Ambedkar University, Delhi. And we're very happy to have co-organized this webinar with the center. So Professor Babu Ramesh.
Yeah, thanks Anandini and Professor Geeta. I'm very happy to introduce CRM. But at the same time, since we are talking about ethics, I have to correct the introduction that is made by Geeta and Anandini. Actually, the correct term is free rider. So we are the free riders of this program. And I'm very happy that, or very thankful that Professor Geeta and Anandini, Sunalini, and the working group was very supportive and very cordial. Like when I just proposed that, like, can we have it as a collaborative program? Actually, they have done all the work, and they have only accommodated this CRM also with this endeavor. I am sure that this is a kind of activity that we should be doing with or all other centers and divisions may be doing with various other divisions and schools of the university, because many a times our interests are shared interests. So we have to work together. And I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to have many more events like this. Many other centers will be collaborating and hosting things together because we have certain shared interests. So let me come to my the responsibility of introducing Center for Research Methods. As Anandini has rightly told, it's a newly Christian center, but it is not a new center. Center has already, it has been working from 2011 onwards. And I am sure that we will be by this time, we have already done certain very meaningful activities in this university. Professor Nakiran, who is a speaker today, he is also the deputy director of the center, and he, Professor Chandan Mukherjee, and many other faculty members of AUD, they have been consistently working on this Center for Research Methods, which was earlier known as Center for Social Science Research Methods. So what I would be doing is that what we are we have had recently very detailed discussions between me and Professor Nakiran and also other important persons, including Vice Chancellor and all important bodies in the university. And I know that like as this Research and Consultancy Division, Center for Publishing, many other centers in AUD are working together in same areas. So we have had discussions and we came out with certain kind of plans. I'm sure that informing these plans to all the faculty members who are present here and the research scholars who are present here, that is very important because this is the first opportunity for us to share our thoughts with all of you, and we would be wanting your collaboration and cooperation while we are implementing these plans. One activity that we will be doing in the future, and as a regular feature, is that with this Research and Consultancy Division and Center for Publishing, we will be we are in the process of developing a course which is in line with UGC guidelines, which is on publication ethics and all. And that course will become a permanent feature for all the PhD students who are working here. New batch onwards, it will be a regular course. And for those people who are doing PhD right now also, they will have to do that course. So that is we are right now developing that kind of a course with the help of a Center for Publishing and the Research and Consultancy Division. Not with the help of, we are doing it together. And we will be thinking of having, as we have been doing, we'll continue to have workshops and seminars on various aspects of research methods, like writing research, methodologies in research, softwares in research, and data in research. We will continue to do that thing. But while doing that thing, what we have been thinking is that this particular Center for Research Methods should be a center for, we will also have a core group Research and Consultancy Division, but at the same time, we will also keep an option that those faculty members and young researchers in the university, if they want to do something meaningful related to research methods, we will be providing a facilitating space, an enabling space where they can come and work. They can offer a particular workshop, or they can do a particular activity where we can provide all kinds of help and logistic support. That is what we are thinking. And one particular activity that we are planning is that already the center has done several activities like organizing seminars and all, and now onwards also, and earlier ones also we will be using. We will convert the activities, academic activities, into documents. For instance, after completion of each of the activity, we will try to convert it as a digital working paper of the center, and probably we will also gradually convert it as a proper publication with the help of Center for Publishing. And also that is one activity we are thinking. We are also thinking about internship options for various research scholars and even MA students who are working in various schools, so that they can come and do a short internship with the center, and they can also work something meaningful on the research methods. We can also convert it as small manuals or textbooks that will help the research methodology students, because research methodology is an area where there are lots of gray areas where students are and young researchers are specifically looking for certain authentic documents. And we would also have visiting faculty options, and research scholars can come and work here. So in brief, in the next few months, since it is pandemic and we are not in a position to do things as we have planned, what we'll be doing is that we will be continuing with a seminar series, maybe with collaborating with other schools and centers. It will have 3 streams. One stream is invited distinguished faculty, or basically external experts. Other stream will be AUD itself has lots of internal resource persons. So we will invite AUD faculty members to speak on this thing. And we will also have one stream for young researchers. That means the PhD scholars within AUD and outside AUD, we can invite them to come and share their research methodology related papers in this. And this will be a regular feature so that, and this is an easy activity which will keep on give the center lots of kind of like dynamism. And CRM, what we are immediately planning to do is that like we are trying to convert or we are trying to create a physical space for CRM, a small physical space, because AUD, anything big, AUD is small, at least AUD main campus where I'm working, and like this KG campus where right now CRM is headquartered. We don't have much space, but we will have a small room for Center for Research Methods where research scholars and like those visiting scholars or even faculty members who are working on specific projects, they can come and work, where we will keep all the softwares or databases that we are getting, where we'll have a small library, and it will be a kind of a space. It will be where everyone can own and they can work. We are thinking about like having that kind of a room, and probably that space may be used for can be used for research scholars and young researchers to come and freely discuss their research methodology related things in an informal manner. Because many a times formal presentations, they will not be finding it very like they may not be having confidence in presenting formal presentations, but they can organize it informally, and we can also help in whatever way we can help. I am sure that this is a kind of a wish list, but at the same time, let us see how things are proceeding. I'm very sorry that like I have taken a lot of time before this important seminar where we have three distinguished speakers. All the three people are essentially from AUD only. Even Professor Soumya, I know that she was a faculty in AUD, and we all share that ownership that like we are AUDians, and we want to come in a common space. And I don't want to talk a lot about what is ethics in research and all, but whenever I think about ethics in research, what I used to think is that, it's like research is a way of life. And as in the case of our lives, like there are ethical considerations and value judgments that may be leading our life. So, and maybe these ethics and value judgments are also subjected to change also. We may think that certain things are ethically correct now, but it may not be considered ethically correct after some time or in a different regime or in a different framework. So I'm sure that I'm also like learning from this discussion and looking forward to this good discussion. And I'm sure that our free ridership will be compensated to some extent by the active participation of Deputy Director of CRM, Professor Nakiran. And with this not brief remarks, I am sure that I took more than 5 minutes, and I'm looking forward to the discussions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Professor Ramesh. It was really helpful to have a larger context of how CRM is working. And I do want to share that this webinar is getting recorded, and we will be producing, just like Professor Ramesh shared, that there will be certain working papers emerging. We hope that post this webinar, we don't end this dialogue on ethics right here in the couple of hours that we will be discussing it and hearing from the speakers, but we hope to bring out a working paper from these presentations as well and have provide access to that written document as well. So those of you who are here with us, welcome. If you've just joined in, we're also streaming live on YouTube. If you know of others who are not able to join in for some reason, you can direct them there. We will post the recording. Dr. Kritika Mathur has been very helpful in helping organize many of these technical aspects. She will help with sort of also posting our recording online. So without taking up more time, I would like to introduce our first speaker for today, Professor Hani Oberoi. As shared earlier, essentially we're all sort of part of this AUD community, and Professor Vahali started her academic career at the Department of Psychology, University of Delhi in 1993 as a research associate. She holds a doctorate from University of Delhi and is a trained psychoanalytical psychotherapist who helped set up the Center for Psychoanalytical Studies, University of Delhi in 2005. She joined us at AUD in 2010 and serves as a professor in School of Human Studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. As a teacher, her work has also been geared towards looking at the processes, both cognitive, intellectual, and emotional experiential in the field of higher education. Her efforts have been to provide a place to a reflexive and empathetically attuned form of teaching, and we have learned a lot from her in the process. She is the author of several publications, including the publication that came out of her own PhD, Lives in Exile, Exploring the Inner World of Tibetan Refugees, Routledge, 2009. So I invite Professor Hani to share her talk with us today, which is titled Ethics as an Ever-Evolving Exploration.
So thank you, Anandini, for that very generous introduction. And I would like to begin by thanking the Research and Consultancy Division and the Center for Research Methods, AUD, for this opportunity to share my thoughts on the ethical imperatives in research. My special thanks to Professors Geeta and Professor Babu, you, Anandini, Sunalini, and Kritika, for all your efforts at organizing this webinar. I would just like to know, I would like to share my screen. Is my screen visible?
It's beginning to load. That's right. It's visible now.
It's visible now. Okay. So as...
Could you make it full screen? Sorry.
Just press F5 on your keyboard.
No. Control and F5?
A function and F5.
Or this right at the bottom, there's an icon for bottom right. There's an icon for a full screen. In your PPT, at the bottom right, the fourth icon is a full screen icon, if I'm not mistaken.
Or you, okay, let them try that. That does.
Where it says 65% for you.
65%, just next to it.
On the left.
Left. No, the icon.
This screen looks like a projector.
No, the fourth icon there at the bottom. You're on the leftmost one, go to the rightmost one.
So where it says 128%, just the button right next to 128% on the left. On the left of 128, yes. That.
Yeah.
It says slideshow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this okay now?
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so as Professor Babu was saying, in research, as in life, an arrival at ethics asks for a perennial exploration, as actually speaking, no prefix sense of morals, no rights and wrongs, do's and don'ts suffice us as we embark on committed journeys to know and engage with other worlds. My presentation today is primarily addressed to researchers at the doctoral level, many of whom may be setting forth on their first serious sojourn to research the questions that have begun to preoccupy their minds with an intensity akin to a dream that holds the dreamer in its grip long after the hour of awakening. I have a training in the discipline of psychology, as Anandini said, psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, and I will be speaking to you of some ethical imperatives that hold value for researchers, particularly working in the domains of humanities and the social sciences. At the very outset, let me say that that I practice and I'm speaking about a genre of research that takes after a blend of the psychodynamic, feminist, post-colonial, and culturally sensitive streams. Broadly speaking, it can be located as a historically situated, contextually grounded, and socio-politically critical attempt of recovering those human voices and experiences which usually lie buried under or are rendered invisible, silenced, or marginalized by the givens of a hierarchically organized world order. In the words of the psychoanalyst Erik H. Erikson, and I quote him, this genre of research, that is the psychoanalytic method, must forever remain a controversial tool, a tool for the detection of that aspect of the total image of the human, which in a given historical period is being neglected or exploited, repressed or suppressed by the prevailing technologies or ideologies, including hasty psychoanalytic ideologies. So, the ethic of psychoanalytic research is to create a space for contested and uncomfortable truths in our collective as well as individual life. Similarly, Foucault, when he is speaking of the relationship between power and knowledge, says that as researchers, our task is to release the genealogies of subjugated and forgotten histories. So, following the post colonial and interpretive turn in social sciences, researchers are encouraged to hone in the skills of self reflexivity and introspection, and they are trained to creatively grapple with emerging dimensions of chaos, also find a language for the unsayable and the unbearable in human interactions. In a way, what I'm saying is that the ethic in research is not to do away with confusion and chaos, but to use it in our research works. In streams such as psychoanalysis, phenomenological hermeneutics, psychohistory, feminist research, ethnography, amongst others, therefore, your screen is not visible and your voice is not there. What? You're not there.
No, we can see the screen and we can hear you.
No, no, it's
She
fine.
can hear me. Yeah. So, in these forms of research, there is a dual emphasis that prevails. On the one hand, the researcher remains preoccupied with bringing to the fore the absent and the negated parts in social life. On the other hand, the researcher uses an experience near perspective, valuing the trials and confusions which accompany a plunge into subjectivity and intersubjectivity. And I make this point because for a long time in social science research, subjectivity and intersubjectivity were looked upon as interferences rather as things which held value in our research work. In psychoanalytic research, the researcher approaches the field with a holistic interactional sensibility that strives to feel and understand the life of other human beings or members of a community by empathetically entering into their subjective world and history. So the ethic of this research is to not objectify human experience, nor to hide behind numbers by reducing pain and suffering into mere statistical figures. Instead, by grappling with narratives and stories, the researcher opens up experiential vistas that may produce disquiet, but nevertheless touch the researcher's self as well as of her readers in a palpable sense. Contrast the figure 12 million dead during the 1947 partition of India with the life story of a single family or displaced individual in the fullness of its nuances, subtleties, and anguish-filled struggles. Thinking about this point, I am led to recall the film Pinjar, based on a story of Amrita Pritam, that tells a tale of a young woman whose life takes an unimaginable, choiceless turn as she is caught between the historical vicissitudes of the 1947 partition. Or think of Manto's Toba Tek Singh, who, after standing for several years at the mental asylum where he is placed, ultimately collapses and falls, thus dies on no man's land between India and Pakistan. These pain-filled narratives touch us to our core, making us rethink the taken for granted greatness of nations and wars, citizens as the insiders, displaced refugees as the outsiders, the madness consequent to national formations and its human cost. Like the storyteller, the literary writer, and the artist, the post positivist social science researcher follows the ethic of painting nuanced and minute images as well as bold strokes on the life's canvas. She creates a living mosaic with oral sources of data stemming from autobiographical, biographical, narrative based research, and stories of life. As Ashish Nandi says, linear accounts of history do us a disservice as they exile emotions, while myths, fables, and stories reconnect the culture to its moral and emotional universe. Following such a perspective, many researchers think of research as an activity in service of life, by which I mean they believe that their research could in some ways contribute to and make a difference to the life and struggles of the research participants. At times, there is an implicit and at other times an explicit socially transformative objective that guides the immersive work in chosen directions. For instance, when I was working with the Tibetans for my PhD, initially it was a part of my PhD work, but later on I realized that I had gotten far more involved with their political and existential strivings, such that long after my PhD had been awarded, I continued to participate in the community's work. Over time, I realized that I had a pertinent role to play by bringing to the fore the stories of displacement to the world at large. Many of my research participants also took a promise from me when they were sharing their life with me that eventually I must write about their stories, and this was amongst the several other reasons that ultimately propelled me to write a book on the experience of Tibetans as refugees, as well as those surviving long term torture and imprisonment back home in China occupied Tibet. So, what we are talking about here is research as an engagement with and for people rather than on and about people. So, as theory serves a role akin to perception or the lens through which we view the world, as the psychoanalyst Christopher Wallace says, we no longer feel comfortable to superimpose too much of theory on the verbalizations of the participants, and instead, we are eager that they speak of their lived realities through their own words. The participatory critical action research perspective, stemming from several sources but also from the works of Paulo Freire, Franz Fanon, and liberation psychology, has highlighted this ethic to its best possibility. One evening, after his consciousness raising group with the economically marginalized people, Ferreri's wife Elsa said to him, Paulo, what you are doing and saying is correct, but you are telling it all to them and not allowing them to speak. This is not how it should be. Ferreri thinks of this as a turning point in developing his pedagogy of the oppressed. Following his tradition of work, researchers often consider themselves as facilitators while the participants create their own records of life. Augusto Boal's Theatre of the Oppressed is based on Ferreri's work and is an excellent illustration of critical participatory action research based ethics. In other words, you can find workers depicting their life through films created by themselves while the researcher stands by them, consciousness raising groups by feminists, and letting the child arrive at a symbolic sense of her work through spontaneous paintings and drawings in psychoanalytic and art based research. With children are other examples of upholding the ethic of participatory research. A reconsideration of power and insight in research is at work here, having major implications for the research, relationship of the researcher with her research participants. A two-way, insightful, and reflexive process is underway. The researcher begins by introspecting and thinking about her subjective positionality, implying where she is coming from, how her class, caste, gender, sexual orientation, generational history, amongst other important markers of her existence, are impacting and interacting with the field of research. Within the psychoanalytic tradition, one also ponders on the conscious and unconscious significance of the meaning of the work to the researcher's past and lived life. This is not a one-time awareness, but an ongoing reflexive process, an attitude and sensibility of self-awareness that accompanies the researcher all through her travails in the field. The meanings are dynamic and ever evolving. If I had time, I would have shared some shifting dynamics for myself from my own PhD work and subsequent researches, but I'm leaving that out given that we have less time. And I would just like to draw your attention that Sigmund Freud thought that personal introspection was so crucial a task for the clinician and the researcher that he is famously remembered to have said, "You will not see in others what you have not learned to see in yourself." The above attitude enables an ethical turn along multidimensional trajectories. The research enterprise becomes one of mutuality between two different but nevertheless equal participants, the researcher and her respondents. The sensibility that the researcher carries is therefore one of respect, curiosity, and marvel at the world of the other, rather than thinking that we are the repositories of quote unquote expert knowledge which our disciplinary training inculcates in us and which we will carry to the field of research and through preconceived categories illuminate the life of the other. Researcher here uses one's theories with much trepidation and tentativeness. You know, one of the great problems of erstwhile research along patriarchal and colonial versions of social science has been that we believe that we, the civilized white, upper class men, upper caste men, went to study, in quotes, natives, savages, blacks, lower caste Dalits, tribals, hysterical women, and so on and so forth. Instead, in the post colonial renditions of research, as the sociologist and ethnographer Renato Rosaldo suggests, the frames of the familiar and the unfamiliar are likely to undergo dynamic changes for the researcher as her familiar world becomes unfamiliar to her and the unfamiliar becoming familiar. In such understandings, the researcher considers oneself forever in the throngs of becoming, never a finished product of knowledge, one who looks at one's resistances and eventually welcomes the understandings from the ground of research. As a very brief illustration, let me go back to Rosaldo's work, where he says that when he went to study a tribe of headhunters called the Ilongots in Philippines, and you know America started on with its war on Vietnam. And he was thinking, how are these people so brutal who are the headhunters? Whereas when he was called back to America to participate in the war, the Ilongots believed, how can a people be so brutal that they will kill in a war people they do not even know? So Rosaldo says that this moment became a moment of deep transformation between him, that the lens between the civilized and the barbaric changed, and he wondered whether nationalism was as gory an experience as was the headhunting. So these shifts in the researcher's own subjectivity and these shifts between the power of the researcher and the people that one is studying is very, very crucial for us to know that the ground of experience sometimes becomes the expert and we become the ones who are learning from that space. This is an ethical consideration that I too experienced in my PhD work when I realized that I was at the limits of my disciplinary knowledge, and many times it was my participants who became mentors to me in the process of my wanting to understand their lives better. Thinking of empathy as the core of the researcher's ethic, Sudhir Kakkar says, and I quote him, the core of the analyst's sensibility is empathy. Empathy is the bridge between the serene reserve of the clinician striving for objectivity and the vital, passionate, and vulnerable person who inhabits the clinician's body. Empathy makes me, as an analyst or research scholar, step out of the anonymity of an impersonal enterprise and constantly recognize myself in it as a human being of flesh and blood. Without its vital presence, I fear that the creative tension between objectivity and impassioned involvement, between the stoic and the emotionally responsive perspectives will be lost. Erickson says that as researchers, we have to be trained in the use of our subjectivity. Like Kakkar, he suggests another paradox, the researcher being able to employ one's subjectivity in a disciplined manner. So, empathy requires one to have a capacity to imagine the feelings of the other and to also reflect on one's activated emotional states at the same time. Unlike lay understandings of empathy that akin it to a state of fusion and merger, in actuality, empathy presupposes an ability to appreciate difference, the recognition of the other's otherness. An arrival at the other's otherness in research, as in human relationships, rests on a capacity for self reflection at the conscious and unconscious levels. Unless this skill is honed in research, we could actually convert it into its antithesis, which is projective identification. Projective identification as an unconscious dynamic of infusing into other people our feeling states, mostly the negative ones. It is true, of course, that a certain degree of coloring the other's world with our personal shades is an inevitable process of research, but ultimately the research work has to move via but beyond the researcher's subjectivity to encompass and reflect the pertinent themes and issues of the participant's life. The disciplined use of the researcher's subjectivity makes the dialectic of self and other, the play between sameness and difference possible. As the researcher ponders on whether one's formulations are serving a self-fulfilling purpose or are actually mirroring the strivings of the other's experience, one realizes that an arrival at empathy awaits some knowledge of where we are coming from and how we are being impacted by the data, both at conscious and unconscious levels. In psychoanalytic terminology, this is referred to as the researcher's countertransference, a meaning-making process wherein the researcher asks oneself pertinent questions such as, how am I being affected in my body, thoughts and feelings in the presence of each of the research participants? Are there some versions of the story that I am ready to listen and others that I tend to gloss over, dismiss or deny, minimize, get irritated with, or simply forget? Again, I would say I learned important lessons in my own work while my parents and grandparents had been displaced by the 1947 partition. I realized that the Tibetan refugees at some levels had experience which was similar to my family's experiences, and at some level their experience were very distinctive, and sometimes I had a difficulty to understand the distinctiveness of the experiences till I had, you know, processed and understood the feelings which were blocking my way of understanding where they were coming from. I have written about this at length, and at another time, I could share instances or experiences, or if there are questions later on in the discussion, I can take those up. So, if we think about research as a dialogical process, which enables the asking of questions of value to the life of the participant, uh, we will have to then we will need to rethink of research as not a process where we are in search of definite answers, but perhaps the work is more about both the researcher and the research participants reaching a sense of the questions which are important to them. There are a number of um, there are a number of relational metaphors here. We could think about the researcher. Is the researcher a co-traveler, as Irwin Yalom suggests? Is the researcher as a hamdard, as Shifa Haq in her work on disappearance in Kashmir puts it, that she was like a hamdard to the people that she was listening to? Or is the researcher a listener and a witness in the life of the other, that Dory Lobb goes on to speak? And I would like to quote Dory Lobb here, uh, and I will just come to that part here, but I would also like to say that Sigmund Freud was very particular to say that in our research, we not only listen through our ears, but we also listen through our bodies. We respond to the evocations, the thrills, the ecstasies, the pains of the other, in effect through a very somatic feeling in our own self. So learning to listen to the body is another ethic of research that we would like to take with ourselves. And as we learn to listen to our bodies, we also learn to listen to the pauses, to the stammers, to the silences, to the tears and the half sentences of our participants. Coming to Dory Lobb, I would like to quote him. Dory Lobb is a psychoanalyst and himself a survivor of the Holocaust, who later went on to study the Holocaust intensely. He is perhaps the best thinker in my reading till date, who emphasizes on the ethical responsibility of the researcher as a listener to life. So he says the listener researcher partakes of the struggles of the victim with the memories and residuals, victories, defeats, and silences, knows them from within so that they can assume a form of testimony. Again, he writes, and I quote, but the listener researcher is also a separate human being carrying out the function of being a witness to the stories of the participants, and yet the listener is the initiator and the guardian of the processes. Many a times, the other does not have a story to tell to us. A story is actually created in the act and process of it being told. Contrast this to versions of research that believe that we are going out there to uncover objective truths which are already lying there. In in the former kind of research, we believe that we are bearing witness through a relational process to a record of life that will eventually come into existence. Of course, listening to trauma narratives is a whole take in itself, and it would require a full session for me to open that up. So I'm not going into that direction for today. But let me suffice by saying that the role of the researcher as a listener is a very crucial one, as the speaker can shrink at any time and withdraw if one does not feel understood. The speaker is trusting and holding the frame of that trust. So, how do we listen to narrations that are about life events and which challenge the sense of facts of history? We must find symbolic meanings for them. Here, the researcher meets many dilemmas, and I will pose them at questions. What are the limits of exploring and engaging with the life of the other? Should we, how far will we talk about painful things in the other's life? How much must we ask? How much must we probe? And what we should not ask? These are questions that I think any researcher who is working with human subjects, and earlier on, in psychology there used to be a lot of research on animals and in experimental contexts, and there was never a botheration as to what we did to the life of the animal. So these are questions we need to ask ourselves. What is the space of respecting the other's limits of knowledge, respecting silence? Our participants might not want to ask themselves several kinds of questions. And should we or should we not probe them beyond a certain point? Should we or should we not respect? And I think we should respect, not trespass, the balance between what the respondent knows and does not or cannot know. So the point here is that research is an activity, however much we are committed to it, but after a point of time, we leave the space. So we should not disrupt too much of the sense of meaning that the person has reached about one's life. And we must also, before we conclude our researches, provide time and safety for closure and containment of experiences that we have opened up. A last few things that I would like to say is that the researcher's function as a witness and as a listener is a paradoxical one: to be unobtrusively present, to learn to respond, as in our human relationships, to the very subtle cues that the speaker is giving to us. We are always in the space of negotiating how much closeness, when to be there, when to allow the other the space for aloneness. This is the paradoxical dance that we play as listeners in research activities. And there can be many intimate details which are shared with us. The confidentiality of those needs to be preserved. Also, I would like to say that in such models of research, people want to also speak to us because sometimes there is a reparative function, there is some degree of healing in the telling of one's life. But is the person feeling comfortable or uncomfortable? This is something that the researcher will have to keep grappling with. The last 2 points that I would like to make is I take a quote again from Sigmund Freud, who says, "Look at a thing or look at a life long enough till it begins to speak to you." I think the value of slowness, the value of repeated returns, immersion in data, density, and following the emotional force of the participant are functions of this form of researching. And lastly, I would like to say that there is another ethical responsibility that awaits the researcher. How will we represent the life of the other? As against the more objective paradigms of research, in qualitative perspectives of research, often the meanings of validity and reliability shift. I would think that a research is reliable in some of these traditions if the people that we are speaking about find a reflection of their life in the writings that we have done about them. It is not a rare part that we sometimes take back our written documents to our respondents and ask them whether they mirror their life closely or not. So, one of the tasks and the ethical uh, importance of the researcher's work is the writing should be affectively alive, keeping the moments of interaction as if they are happening between us and the other just at that point of time. Adrienne Rich, the feminist poet, says, when you look into a mirror and you see a void, there is a moment of psychic disequilibrium. I would end by saying that our ethical responsibility as researchers is that when the other looks into the mirror of their life, which is our writing, they should not see a void, but they should see a reflection of their being, so that it is not a moment of psychic disequilibrium, but it becomes a moment of psychic integration for them. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Honey. We really appreciate your very sensitive presentation on this topic of, what is ethical research. And I think one thing that sort of travels through your presentation and the forthcoming ones is this emphasis on the role of the researcher. While we haven't sort of encapsulated that in our title of the webinar, what it means to be a researcher engaged with ethical research becomes very crucial for us to all reflect upon. And thank you for sharing some very excellent references that will definitely help our research scholars as well, who are here both in the Zoom webinar as well as on YouTube. So we will take questions for you at the end, along with all the other questions. So we request all the participants here to post their questions on the chat box, as we will quickly transition into bringing our next speaker on board for their presentation. I would like to introduce Dr. Nakiran Nanjappan is Professor of Public Health in the School of Global Affairs and the Deputy Director, Center for Research Methods at Ambedkar University, Delhi. He received his MPhil PhD in Social Sciences in Health from Jawaharlal Nehru University in 1998, soon after an MA in Anthropology from the University of Madras. He joined AUD in 2015 with a very strong career trajectory of engaging in research and teaching in the academy and in the industry of public health. He has conducted research with organizations such as the UNICEF in Maharashtra and has taught at institutions prior to AUD such as Tata Institute of Social Sciences and the Indian Institute of Public Health, Gandhinagar in Gujarat. Professor Nakiran has over 16 publications, perhaps more, that intersect issues of education, child nutrition, public health systems, mental health, and qualitative research methodology. I invite you, Professor Nakiran, to share your talk today titled Understanding Anonymization Across Research Contexts.
Thank you, Anandini, for that liberal introduction. And thank you, the Research and Consultancy Division, AUD, Professor Geeta Venkatraman, Anandini, Sunalini, Kritika, and Center for Research Methods for this opportunity. Initially, I was a little reluctant to accept this talk at this moment of time. The day my colleague had called, a friend of mine's wife had passed away that morning. And I was a little upset that why are we trying to pretend that we are normal? But later I decided as an institution, we have our own mandate. And this is a very important topic. And So, and it also has helped me to collect my thoughts, put together my thoughts. And I think I've learned quite a bit from preparation for this particular talk. And let me share my screen, put my presentation on. Is it visible? Is my screen visible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay, great. The previous talk was amazing talk on a substantive issue of ethics, though it is derived and grounded from a particular immersion. It's an extremely an important way of understanding ethics as a researcher, as one bees in the field, learns and connects to one's own life and one's own self. And an important thing, and I think I can draw a lot of substance material from previous presentation, including what Geeta had said and Babu had said of organic, the nature of ethics, and a continuity between life and research, and the way Professor Hani started her presentation of no pre-given norms. And research is about bringing to the foreground what is absent and what is negated. Yeah, these are important background on which I want to locate my presentation. My presentation is located more in the procedural aspect of ethics. And as a student of public health and working in public health, any presentation I make in AUD, I get a little unease, a little uncomfortable, because AUD is an environment where we have researchers coming from a range of disciplines. And the imagination of research is so different, ranging from cultural studies to literature to management, development studies. The imagination of research is so different. And as a person from CRM, also as a member of ethics committee, somewhere I have a mandate to sort of try to connect everybody. So it just gives a lot of uneasiness to me. I tried to do justice to this uneasiness. I've tried to respond to possible challenges from a range of disciplines. I'm sure there will be some challenges. So this is going to be my outline of this presentation. I'll start with a set of caveats. I will introduce research ethics with a slide, then begin with a one-sentence definition of anonymization. Why anonymization? How we anonymize in field, and across research procedures, like our research approaches, like a survey or in research where we use a lot of narrative and descriptive data, particularly the way Professor Hani was referring to, and also anonymous at what cost. So these are some of the topics I want to explore. Some of the caveats, as I already said, the meaning and imagination of research differs vastly across disciplines, and so may be the way we operationalize research ethics. And there are differentials in levels of relevance of research ethics across disciplines, say from history to literature, management, development studies, sociology, anthropology. Okay, and in some disciplines, the entire topic of procedural ethics may be quite irrelevant, while there may be deeper, profound issues of substantive ethics, which are very important. And there may be academic engagements that border between research and teaching, learning. Okay, therefore, as a social science student, we operationalize all borders and we problematize all borders, so that everything can create problems. And when we make a presentation like this for a university level presentation. Therefore, this presentation may not sufficiently capture imaginations in all fields across all disciplines. So pardon me if I don't connect to some of your imaginations of research. So what do we mean by research ethics? I want to use this slide to talk about what is research ethics in a substantive manner. Okay, so it's about reflecting on and problematizing the power relations involved in research process. Professor Hani had very in a subtle manner, brought out the important way in which power operates in constructing self, constructing participants, constructing disciplines, constructing knowledge and boundaries, and so on and so forth. Okay, so between the researcher and the participants, between the knowledge systems of the researcher and that of participants or subgroups within this participants. Across different vantage points of positionality of the researcher, research as an instrument, research like it or not. Most research are instrumental. Of course, the research has an inherent transformative role, but research as an output most often becomes instrumental unless we have certain genres of research like operation action research where there is also instrumental role for change and issues of social asymmetry between researchers and the researched, of being excluded from being researched, or the problem of appropriating narratives. We end up having dilemma whether I should do a research on a particular community, population which are vulnerable, or as a person from an outsider to have a locus standi to do research. And power at various stages of research. From conceptualizing research, choosing to do research in a particular field as against some other field, collecting data, being in the field, analyzing data, and reporting research findings. And as a student of research, as we engage in research, then therefore, how do we explore ways to recognize, resolve, reconcile these concerns? Okay, so these are all, I call them as a substantive issues of ethics, research ethics in the field. Of course, procedural ethics cannot solve all the problems. It can, I think one of the duty of the procedural ethics to make these issues come to the foreground, make researchers to reflect on, problematize them. And when they go to the field, go as a reflective researcher to the field. Okay, so procedural ethics only can guide to only a limit. It can only provide norms to level of baseline. Beyond that, it is how an individual researcher reflectively problematizes and engages in field. Okay. Yeah. Having said that, I'm moving on to a very narrow topic within research ethics, what's called anonymization. So how do we understand the process of anonymization? How do we engage in anonymizing data? What is the importance of that? Okay, and what are the problems of anonymization also, given the fact that research is so varied, etc. Okay. So what do we mean by anonymization? So masking of participation in the research through masking personal identifiers of participants. To put it in simple terms, this is what we call anonymization. Okay, basically masking of identifiers. And this is very closely and inseparably intertwined with another concept called confidentiality of data. Okay, they're two different terms, but they're deeply intertwined and interrelated and inseparable. Okay, so confidentiality is about not disclosing outside the research team what a participant had said. Okay, so it's about confidentiality of data and anonymization of participation. Both are interrelated. In situations where complete anonymization is not possible, an additional possibility is you collect identifiers but you keep them in a manner that it doesn't go out of the research team. Okay. So it's about safekeeping of or encrypting data. Okay. So when we talk about anonymization, we talk about anonymizing names, not revealing images of participants, the manner that they can be identified, or anonymizing place, designation, etc., where in a descriptive studies, revealing places, designation may reveal reveal the participant's identity, or even a community's identity in some situations. Okay. Of course, nowadays we have to keep in mind digital identifiers like emails, email IDs, phone numbers, PAN cards, barcodes. Okay, so there can be a lot of other things which may become important in research involving, say, GIS, big data, etc. Okay, right. So these two terms are very strongly also interrelated to the process of taking informed consent. Okay, so when we talk about informed consent, we just don't take, are you willing to be part of the study or not? Okay, it's a very descriptive, negotiated process where you take also consent for anonymization, degrees of anonymization, etc. Okay, and why should we anonymize data? Of course, this looks very obvious, and most of it could be obvious. Is to avoid harm to the participants. Harm could be psychological harm, social harm, physical, professional harm, legal. Okay? I don't want to give examples. I'm sure you can imagine examples. But in terms of question and answer session, if somebody needs an example, I can provide an example. So avoiding harm could be seen as a kind of an utilitarian understanding of ethics. But the very right to privacy, okay, very right to privacy, right to not reveal your identity, okay, even if the harm is not happening there, okay, it should be respected. So it's the important reason why we anonymize data. But there are situations where this idea of anonymization may compete with another value of ownership of representation. There may be research situation, in many research situations, in participate research very strongly, but even in every other research, a participant may want to willfully identify her narrative, what she said, and in fact want to own the narrative. Okay. So ultimately it's about what the participant wants to, whether she wants to reveal her identity or whether she wants to own a narrative. Okay, so as a participant, she has the right to self-determine how she has presented, can be presented. Therefore, it's about anonymization is not a one-size-fit-all situation. It has to be reflectively engaged in the field. Okay, can talk about more when we come to discussion if you have to discuss more. Now, how do we anonymize? Okay, different research traditions have different possibilities. Okay, as we will look at next slide, subsequent slides, a survey provides certain possibilities. An ethnographic research provides certain limitations, certain possibilities. Okay, and what is possible in one research approach may not be the right or possible in another research approach. Okay. So for some situations, we don't have to collect any personal identifiers. In surveys, for example, we can actually totally not collect personal identifiers at all. We don't need names, etc. Of course, it also comes to the question of treating research participants as inanimate, instrumentally used, etc. That those issues keep coming in. Okay, but imagine doing a research where you have some 2,000 participants or 5,000 participants. Okay, where like it or not, those disciplines deal with large numbers. Okay, and as a person from CRM, I'm not able to privilege one discipline over the other discipline or privilege one approach over another approach. Every approach has its own strengths and weakness, its own way of understanding its validity, understanding its relevance, and dealing with issues of ethics, etc. Okay. So some research we can say that we don't have to collect identifiers, or we collect identifiers and we immediately separate and keep it away in an encrypted, coded manner secretly. Okay. Or we collect them, but when at the level of analysis, at the level of writing reports, dissemination, we use only aggregated level data. We don't use disaggregated level data where personal identifiers can be identified. Or we mask personal identifiers, like if we collect names, we are careful with names, or we use pseudonyms when in publications. Okay. We also mask names of the places, sometimes designations, organizations. Okay. Of course, the images is a very problematic issue, because masking images is deeply problematic. Like we have seen news clippings where you see pixels being blurred, or a small black band being provided across the eyes. Okay, of course, it looks extremely unacceptable. Okay, we also see maps where names of places being masked. Okay, so I don't want to judge what is right and what is wrong. I will leave it to the researchers. Every method has issues of ethicality. Every method has limitations within which they operate. Okay. Yeah. So these are all possibilities. I'm not saying what is right or wrong. Okay. And often we use pseudonyms for people, for places, cities. Okay, we have village studies done in India. Professor M.N. Srinivas, Mackie Marriott, they have used pseudonyms for their villages. Okay, or removal of personal identifiers. We collect them and remove them. Okay, if you look at a lot of surveys, they use a separate folios which can be torn apart after the survey is done. Okay, and this is coded and entered separately. Okay, or they are kept in an encrypted manner. The personal identifiers are kept in encrypted manner. Okay, and the issues of GIS data, big data, digital research introduces new dimensions of problems of anonymization. And here's the situation where your data can be collected even without your knowledge, can be used, etc. Okay, and therefore this introduces newer dimensions of ethics. And as a researchers, as a citizens, as a users of digital services, we end up having these problems and we confront the problem. Okay. But these fields who work in this field of GIS, big data, are also trying to grapple with the problem of ethics and anonymization. They are coming up with new methods for anonymizing data, big data, etc. Okay, yeah, and in research situation where we collect descriptive, narrative data, where you get to know people in totality as a full, complete person, normal life. Okay, it almost becomes impossible to anonymize. Okay, I'll come to that slide a little later. Almost becomes impossible to anonymize, impossible to keep data confidential outside of the research team. Okay, therefore we end up talking not anonymization in absolute terms, but in terms of levels or degrees of anonymization. Okay, so only to a certain degree we can anonymize. Beyond level, it's impossible to keep anonymization ensured. Okay, so we'll look at these possibilities and subsequent slides. So coming to survey, you like it or not, it's one of the extensively used method in many disciplines. Okay, and we grapple with issues of ethics, issues of anonymization, confidentiality here. Okay, and usually data is collected from a large number of participants, which introduces issues of ethics. It also solves some of the problems. Okay, large number, then you don't collect data which are deeply personal or intimate. Okay, and there may not be need to collect personal identifiers. Data is often in the form of numerical or categorical values. You usually use only aggregate level data after initial processing of data. Okay. Therefore, masking or encrypting of personal identifiers is easy. And data at that level with personal identifiers is handled by a smaller team. Okay, you don't have to translate, transcribe, code. Okay, and often you collect data from a participant at an individual level, in an individual situation, not in a group situation. Okay, therefore, the data is not revealed to large number of people outside the researcher per se. Okay, and therefore anonymization becomes easier. Of course, it introduces a lot of substantive issues of ethics here. Okay? I'm not denying that. Okay? Now coming to studies with narrative descriptive data, where many of our research will be dwelling in. Okay, this introduces tremendous challenges for the researcher. Okay, for the very design of this kind of research. Firstly, often we end up working with a very small number of participants. And therefore, we end up knowing them as a complete persons, unlike a research where we collect data on, say, on some 50 questions or 100 questions, not beyond that. But here we end up knowing a person as a complete person. We almost know this person's life. We study everyday life of these people with a strong rapport built. Interactions become quite informal. Researcher may get to know these people as a real person and with the life more intimately. And this studies most often is highly intrusive in a social psychological sense. And we collect and use verbatim data. In fact, even our publications will use in verbatim data. We use thick descriptions. And data is collected in the community settings. There may be online people may be there, okay, because we want to be normal, quote unquote. Okay, so therefore, people in the community may be part of this process, they may be witness to this process, they may be privy to the data being collected. And more importantly, participants get unguarded as research proceeds. As a student of anthropology and as a person doing ethnographic research, you know that as you are in the field for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, you get very friendly to participants. Participants become very friendly to you. Okay, so there may be situations. Often there are situations where participants confess things to you, share things in confidence, or a government teacher or a medical doctor or a member of a government service may say something off the record. Okay, so you are privy to a lot of data which are very intimate, which may, if not carefully handled, may bring harm to the participants in very many sense. Okay, and a large team may be often involved. Okay, of course, if you have your own personal PhD research, you may do it on your own. Okay, but even here, suppose you're doing research in a language where you don't know. Okay, so you might have somebody to transcribe, somebody to translate. Okay, or if it is a larger study, you may have a team of people who code the research, translate the research, transcribe the interviews. Okay, so therefore a large team gets involved. And so for these reasons, anonymizing participation is almost impossible. Okay. Moving further. Okay. These research situations also introduce a lot of other problems, substantive problems for research. Often data that have to be masked may have central importance to the study. Okay. Right. For example, issues of sexuality, issues of professional conduct. Okay. Even I mean, given example, name, for example. Okay, even a name as simple as a name, as basic as a name, may have a lot of analytical importance in a research. Okay, right? If you take demographic researchers on sex, on anti-female bias. Okay. There is a tradition in India across the country, where unwanted, quote unquote, unwanted children are named in a particular manner. Okay. For example, Nakusha is a very popular name in Maharashtra, and in 2011, 222 girl children were renamed by the Maharashtra government in their drive to address fallen child sex ratio. Okay. So as basic as name, it's important that you analyze, study, and publish. And if you make it confidential, then you are losing a big chunk of an important area where you to intervene is made unavailable for analysis and presentation. Okay, and name is only example. There can be a large gamut of data which may have to be anonymized. Okay, therefore there is and anonymizing, therefore publishing may also be unethical. Okay, for different reasons. So therefore you have to negotiate and balance between anonymization and what is important to be published, even if it means that you sort of breach the clause of anonymity. And there may be a situation where people or family members of participants don't want anonymous. Okay, there may be upset with that your son's narrative of fighting with the disease given a name which is totally alien to the particular culture. Okay, we have studies which we have said like that. Likewise, masking of a face with face or a black band across eyes, participants may or certainly will object to their presentation of their face in that particular manner. Okay. So therefore, for many reasons, masking or anonymization is either not possible or not appropriate, or people don't want it to be anonymized. Okay. Therefore, complete anonymity may not be possible. You may have to talk in terms of levels of anonymity. Okay. Therefore, when you take the consent process, you talk to the participants for such and such reason. Certain of anonymity may not be possible. Your participation in the study, it's possible that your community members, your neighbors may come to know. Okay. Therefore, it's at the level of it may at the level of publication.
Professor Nakiran, your voice is breaking a little. We can't hear you.
Therefore, it might be useful to say, am I audible?
No,
It's still breaking, and just had a small request as well.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah. Also,
Yeah,
just a
sorry
small
for-
request if we can wrap up in another few minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. But I think we can hear you now that the video is
Yeah,
off.
okay. Okay, I think it's got unmuted by mistake or something.
I'm not able to see the presentation. Can others see it?
No, I can't see it either.
So there's always problem in coming as later speakers.
Nakil,
Anonymity.
your
Yeah.
share screen has also stopped, I think.
Is it visible now?
Yes.
Okay. So, so let me keep some of these points here. And ethnographic work where there was a less of concern towards anonymization. And in fact, even in a book, in 1998 book I read, where there was a kind of a presentation of photos of women with very sad captions for these photographs. And we have one more strategy where some of the ethnographers had published their ethnographic work as a literary contribution, but in pseudonyms, so that the link between their work and this publication gets disconnected, and therefore people can not identify the village or the participants who were studied, etc. Yeah, and issues of anonymization becomes far more important in the era of digitalization. We have a digital mode of publication being available, searchable, accessible, and available for posterity. It becomes far more important. And the last point here is about research. Even in social sector, data has become increasingly politicized, okay, for good and bad reason, okay, and therefore anonymization is again much more important these days. Yeah, and therefore the link between anonymization and informed consent becomes important. So during the process of informed consent, when we talk about what set of data will be collected, we may have to discuss the process of anonymization, degrees of anonymization, and exclusive permissions for taking photographs, taking audio recording, okay, and going back to them when using their images, verbatim quotations with identification when at the time of publications. And yeah, having discussed this, it's important to state that the procedural ethics may often only prescribe a minimum baseline level, and the researcher may have to reflectively operationalize, keeping in mind the substantive aspect of ethics in mind.
Professor Nakiran, your voice is
okay. The last slide I have
is not very audible. Okay, the slide is visible. Thanks.
activity. Yeah. So at what cost? At a bureaucratic one-size-fits-all fashion of enforcing anonymization may have its own way of damaging the search culture. Okay. While we assure and ensure ethical conduct within one single research, research as an enterprise among the academic community, if you see ethics involved there, Okay, if procedural ethics comes in the way of doing research, there is a tendency to avoid studying certain topics or avoid certain groups, okay, or what we call skim research, okay, or we may also avoid certain research approaches, methodologies that are by design more democratic, more empowering, but which may require more stricter operationalized of ethics and anonymization. Okay? And in research situations that have heavy commercial prospects in public health and management research, okay, it may be easier to deny benefits that can potentially accrue from participating in research. Okay, a classic case is the HeLa cell case where a person who donated her cancer cells, which became immortal cells, which were in a life form, being part of cloning studies, and I'm sure it may be part of you and my body. Okay, and for a long time, that family didn't get the credit, recognition that this person's contribution has contributed for this humanity. Okay? And the last point is: are we losing the transformative potential of research when we not able to reveal the identity of participation compared to an activist journalism, for instance? I mean, I have an example in mind of Basha Singh's writing on manual scavengers, where she effectively brings a case study. I mean, yeah, a person, an activist, a person from the community of manual scavenging who had a leading role in this movement as early as late 90s, okay, and whose pictures are available online and whose names are visible, and Basha Singh's names are in her book and her journalist writings. Okay, I think I'll stop here. I can be happy to take some questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Some very insightful comments from you and reflections about anonymity, and something that I have also sort of, and I'm sure everyone else engaged in research has sort of come to as a point of dilemma of whether to anonymize or not. Particularly in ethnographic research, one is trained to anonymize continuously for various kinds of concerns of harm to the community. And particularly with children and young people, it takes on a whole different meaning. So thank you very much, Professor Nakiran, for a very insightful talk. We will move on to our final speaker for today. And after that, we'll keep some time for question and answers, and we'll try and wrap up the entire webinar by around 2 p.m. So thanks everyone for staying with us. Dr. Soumya Uma is Associate Professor at Jindal Global Law School at the O.P. Jindal Global University since January of 2020. Prior to this, she was teaching at the School of Law, Governance and Citizenship at our very own Ambedkar University, Delhi. She has also taught at other renowned Indian law universities such as the National Law School of India University, Maharashtra, the National Law University, Mumbai. She has also served as a research consultant on human rights with international agencies such as UNDP, the UNOHCHR, and the International Commission of Jurists. She holds a doctorate from NLS Bangalore and a double LLM from University of Nottingham and University of Mumbai, respectively. She has a very extensive sort of 25 years combined work experience as an academic, law researcher, lawyer, trainer, writer, and campaigner on gender, law, and human rights. Her teaching and research interests fall at the intersection of gender, human rights, and the law. So Dr. Uma has also an extensive research and publication profile with 12 authored books and about 50 articles. And she's currently authoring a book on victims and the witness protection for gender-based violence. I'm very excited and happy that she has joined us today. And I invite her for her talk, which is titled Feminist Research Ethics. We look forward to your talk, Samya. Please do unmute your mic. Yes, now you're on mute. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Anandini. And I'm very happy to be associated again with AUD. In fact, when Anandini contacted me a couple of weeks ago or maybe a month ago regarding this particular webinar, I immediately grabbed the opportunity and I said yes to her because I'm very happy to be, to be back speaking to, and listening to my former colleagues and friends from AUD. And a special thanks, of course, to the organizers, to Research and Consultancy Division, and to the Center for Research Methods at AUD for having me here. So as the last speaker of this webinar, it's kind of, it's an advantage as well as a disadvantage. The advantage is that some of the things that I wanted to say have already been said by Professor Nakiran and Professor Honey Oberoi. So that gives me an advantage of just kind of referring to that and not having to elaborate too much on those aspects. The disadvantage, of course, is that, for the participants, you've been listening to us for a very long time, maybe 1.5 hours. So as the last speaker, the onus is also on me to ensure that, I make this presentation a little interesting so that you don't really switch off. So what I do plan to do in my presentation of about 25 minutes or so is to speak about feminist research ethics. And what I will be doing is literally to be scratching the surface. But I have prepared a list of some readings which can be shared by the organizers with all the participants to, for further reference. And a lot of what I will be sharing will be based on my own experiences, my own journey of research in the last 26 years or so. So I hope to share some of those experiences to kind of show the dilemmas, the ethical dilemmas that you as a researcher or you as a potential research scholar may face. Um, so let me start with two scenarios. Let's take scenario one, which is a single woman. She is in a very bad mental, not mental, physical state because of COVID. And she has young children. And a researcher wants to study the relationship between a dying single woman and her children. Now, in this situation, how would we look at consent? She is already in such a vulnerable state because of her physical health. Would we try and ensure consent, get her consent to studying her, to interviewing her, to getting her views? Would that even be ethical to do it when she's in such a vulnerable situation? Maybe we should be assisting her to get better health facilities and not indulging in the research at all. Or would we look at the research as a way of bringing certain kinds of benefit? Maybe there is a benefit involved in this research in terms of influencing, the findings may influence certain kinds of government schemes policies which may help single women who are in very difficult health situations in relation to child support. So how would we balance this vulnerability that this woman is facing with the larger interests of the research that may come out? So I'm just posing this as a possibility or an example of a dilemma, an ethical dilemma that a researcher may face. Or another example, which is much closer to the area of my work, which has been largely around human rights violations and particularly on various kinds of violence against women. So let's say a Dalit woman has been gang raped, and the perpetrators are upper caste men in the village. The perpetrators have a lot of clout. Some of them may even be police officials involved in this act, maybe in abetting, maybe in covering up, destruction of evidence. And this woman is very, very angry, agitated, and she says, "Reveal my name. I want the world to see my face. I want the world to see my name." So Professor Nakiran's presentation has told us so much about anonymization and the need for anonymization to prevent potential harm. But what if the woman herself wants to reveal her face or her name, or maybe she thinks that revealing her face or name may give her a kind of protection which anonymization may not give her. So I, as a feminist researcher, where do I stand? Do I respect the woman's agency and autonomy, which is a very, very important feminist principle? So do I respect her agency, or do I look at the larger picture of potential harm, where I think that she is agitated and she may not realize actually the kind of potential harm that she may face if she's if her face or her name is revealed. So where do I stand as a feminist researcher? Do I have a right to judge this situation at all? Yet, in terms of research ethics, very often we are put in this situation where we are making judgments. And how are we making these judgments? We are making these judgments based on certain kinds of ethical framework. So these are just two instances that I'm giving you about the ethical dilemmas. So I want to start my formal presentation with two caveats and one unapology, where in case my presentation leaves more questions than answers, please understand that that is how ethical dilemmas in real life ethics, in real life research is. So I really wouldn't be apologetic about that. At the same time, some of what I say, my work has been primarily in terms of research with marginalized communities, particularly women, but also religious minorities, Dalits, and so on. So I haven't worked with certain marginalized groups. For example, one may wonder, what about a queer perspective? I haven't really worked on that, but I think some of what I'm going to say and some of the ethical principles can be applied to other non-male perspectives as well, including a queer perspective. And the second caveat that I want to say is that a lot of what I draw upon is my own research, which is qualitative in nature. But at the same time, some of these ethical principles may also be applicable to quantitative research, particularly where feminist research methodologies are used. So as a researcher, one grows over a period of time. And I'm sure all of us who are part of this webinar will agree that, a research that one has done maybe 10 years back or 20 years back, today when we look back at it, we may think that, oh, I could have done it differently. I could have done it better. Why did I take that particular decision? How naive of me, how unethical of me even. So this is something that I have gone through as well. And I think it's something that as young research scholars and as potential research scholars, many of you will also go through. But I think to me, the bottom line has been that even if it has been a personal journey of learning through different kinds of research and through interactions with people that whose lives I study. The bottom line for me is there should be no damage to anyone's life or reputation or property, and definitely no irreparable damage. There are mistakes that may be made, but those mistakes should not have ramifications for the persons concerned. That to me would be the bottom line. So with that, let me start my presentation itself. Yeah. So before we can move on to feminist research ethics, I will need to speak a little bit about feminist research and how feminist research, in a sense, is a little. It is a part of social science research, and yet there are certain kinds of there is a uniqueness to it. So what is feminist research and why feminist research is what I want to start off with. So feminist research is, in a sense, an approach to research which is developed in response to concerns by feminist scholars about the limits of traditional methodology to capture the experiences of women. Although there is a lot of traditional methodology that is used to capture the experiences of women, yet very often a lot of this research methods are very, very androcentric. So they center around man as the subject and woman as the other, as Simone de Beauvoir said. So what happens is that there is also an exclusion from dominant avenues of knowledge building, and there is a diminishing of the value of women's experiences and concerns. For example, during the Nazi regime and thereafter, there was a lot of research that was found, and this research has come into the limelight only from the 1980s onwards, which was very, very focused feminist research about women prisoners in the concentration camps. Yet, at that point in time, that was not considered important. Women's lives, women's experiences, women's perspectives, women's aspirations were not considered important enough. And this kind of research came in much later, and one would also be aware that, for example, what is euphemistically referred to as comfort women, which was a phenomenon which was so well known at that point in time. There were women's experiences of sexual slavery were not considered important enough to be prosecuted during the Nuremberg trials. So that is just to tell you how these are some of the reasons why there has been a necessity for feminist research to come in, where there is a focus not on men, not on men's experiences, and not a presumption that men's experiences mirror women's experiences, but women's experiences are unique because of their specific socio-cultural context. And so it's important to be able to look at women's experiences and be able to research it through that specific lens. Questioning and critiquing androcentric bias in research. There have been checklists for inclusion of a women's perspective. I have shown here Margaret Eichler and Jean Laponte's work. This has actually had checklists. And, to us today, it may be amusing as to why there have to be this kind of checklist. Isn't it implicit that a women's perspective will be included? It is not, because even now, a few years ago, there were fact-finding reports in a particular context of communal violence that had taken place in India. And all the fact-finding reports talked about what were done with men, how many men were killed, not killed, injured, tortured, what happened to the houses, what happened to the places of worship. But nobody asked the question, what happened to the women? And it wasn't thought of as important enough to document women's experiences. It is also difficult to document women's experiences in those situations. I do understand that, and that is why it's important to have this special lens. The second aspect of feminist research, so that is basically, I've explained why there is a need for, for doing research through a feminist approach. In terms of what is feminist approach is grounded in feminist theory. So many of us would be aware of feminist theory about patriarchy, about subordination, subjugation of women through patriarchy, about challenging public-private dichotomy, also about social, political, economic equality between men and women. So the feminist principles basically guide us towards the feminist research. Third aspect is bringing women's issues, voices, experiences to the center stage, which I think I've already explained, so I won't go on more with this, but only to add here that there is something called asking the woman question. And what that basically means is, in any context that that one is researching, the very natural, the normalized approach to research would take into consideration men's lives and men's experiences. But unless one asks the woman's question and asks, how is this particular policy or this incident or this scheme or this law, how is it impacting women? What are women's views on it? What do they have to say? How are they engaged with it? What are their experiences with this incident or this policy or scheme? That is asking the woman question, and that then helps to bring women's issues, voices, experiences to the center stage. The fourth aspect of feminist research is valuing women's lived experiences, because women are repositories of knowledge. Very often when we think of knowledge, we think of very, very academic kind of research and writing. But women's lived experiences, and I think Professor Honey O'Broy did speak about lived experiences, narratives, stories, and how that is important in social science research. And just to take that a little further, when we talk about feminist research, we are also talking about valuing women's lived experiences, because we see women as we see the participants, women participants, as repositories of knowledge. So feminist accounts of life become important, as Catherine McKinnon has talked about. And as Sandra Harding has said, it's about a generation of problematics from the perspective of women's experiences. The fifth aspect of feminist research, and this links very intrinsically with feminist research ethics, is a commitment to improving women's lives. And all feminist research, without an exception, is committed to improving women's lives. It may be improving one particular woman's life, maybe a community, or it could be in terms of influencing law and policy so that a larger a group of women can benefit. But the whole idea is about commitment to improving women's lives. And so it is not, we are not looking at the research as merely a statistical or a transactional exercise of gathering data, but highlighting women's voices, awareness raising, advocacy, empowerment, and so on. Now, in legal research, for example, and my discipline is law, in law research, very often women or any particular human being who is a participant in the research is referred to as case. And this is extremely dehumanizing. It's demeaning and it's humiliating, and it certainly doesn't fit in with the feminist research ethics that we are talking about, where we are not looking at the person as a case or as statistics, but in terms of understanding their lived experiences and documenting that and analyzing it in order to improve women's lives in the larger sense. And the fifth point then connects with the largest, with the last point, which is about bringing social change. It is not that the particular research that a researcher is undertaking may not bring about a very big transformation, but it is about bringing in those, it is about challenging inequalities, injustices, and so on. Now, what does feminist research ethics draw attention to? Firstly, it is about asking the women question, which I've already spoken about. Second is use of feminist multiple standpoint epistemology. And this is, although it sounds very complicated, it really isn't complicated. It is about having a research which is grounded in women's oppressed location. So, for example, if we look at Harriet Jacobs in 1861, she wrote something called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, written by herself. And why was that important? It was important because we heard the voice of a slave girl and we heard her life incidents from her own voice. And this was important because the same experiences, the same incidents heard from the perspective of a slave driver or a slave master and from the perspective of a slave would be completely different. And it is important then to understand women's oppression, subjugation through their own voices, through their own oppressed location. However, all women in a particular situation of oppression may not be going through the same kind of experiences. So there's also a diversity in women's lives because women are, again, not a homogeneous community. And that's why we talk about multiple standpoint epistemology. So there are multiple and interlocking forms of oppression, and that is something that needs to be kept in mind. So Sharmila Rege, connected this to the Indian situation, to Dalit feminism, and she talked about Dalit feminist standpoint. And that in the 1990s, it really opened up a lot of spaces to talk about, to talk about feminist research in a way that hadn't been talked about earlier. The next aspect is looking at boundaries, looking at silences, looking at intersectionalities. And I think I won't explain that more because I think some of this has already been covered by the earlier speakers. Fourth aspect, questioning objectivity and accepting subjectivity. What is referred to by Anne Scales as the tyranny of objectivity. So feminist research considers objective research, objectivity or objective reality as a myth. And it is a myth which is camouflaging patriarchal projections, because no research can be 100% objective. And even when we are talking about quantitative research, for example, we think that quantitative research is very objective because it is the computer, it is the machines which are going to put the data together. At the same time, remember that even in quantitative research, there are human elements which come in, which means that there is subjectivity which is creeping in. And the whole aspect in feminist research, as in many aspects of social science research as well, is about accepting subjectivity and not fighting it. Marginalization, inclusion, and normalization is something that feminist research ethics draws attention to. Normalization is a very, very important concept here. It is considered normal. Many things are considered natural and normal, right? So it could be something, could be normal. A man, a husband beating his wife could be considered normal. Marital rape could be considered normal. A woman taking care of her children could be considered normal. But it is important from a researcher's point of view to be questioning all of these relationships and their power differentials. I think both Professor Hani Oberoi as well as Professor Nakiran have dealt with the power differentials. So in terms of feminist research, it is about breaking down the power between the researcher and the researched, looking at it as a partnership, not in terms of a one-way process of eliciting data, but about receiving and giving information. So, for example, when I conducted my research, doctoral research, and I was speaking to women who had been threatened when they were going to court as a witness. So my study was on witness protection in context of gender-based violence. So sometimes they would want certain kinds of information, or sometimes even if they don't want, I know that some kinds of information may be useful, maybe a contact with a lawyer, maybe a contact with a support group at the local level, maybe give some information about a law or a procedure that the participant is not aware of. But that becomes important in terms of feminist research ethics, because it is a partnership and it is not a one-way process of eliciting data. What do feminist research ethics address? There are 4 kinds of politics. I think much of this has already been talked about by the earlier researchers, earlier speakers. So politics of location, politics of representation, who is being represented and how, politics of interpretation, so how is the data being interpreted, and politics of publication. So Giza Kirsch, her work speaks a lot on this. So this is something that one could be looked at. The Hathras incident, for example, threw up a lot of questions about the politics of representation. who is representing whom, how is the person being represented. And since there has been so much of misrepresentation of women, which led to feminist research in the first place, how do we make sure that the participants' experiences are properly represented, and how do we make sure that they have the first agency and the researcher doesn't take away that agency? So those are some of the politics of research. I'm aware that it's about 22 minutes, so I'll just take another 2 minutes to complete. So these are some 6, there are probably many more ethical principles, but I thought these 6 are important to look at. So reflexivity and self-reflexivity, which I think Professor Nakiran has already talked about it. So it's about the researcher's awareness of own position and privilege, biases, and so on, and how that can influence the research.
Soumya, we've lost your voice and the video is also stuck now. Is that the case for everyone?
Yes, that's right, Geeta.
Maybe her internet connection went.
Maybe she's just in the conclusion phase, so
Yeah.
if this doesn't come back on in another minute, we can move on to Q&A and we'll ask her to conclude during that time period.
Yeah, I think that might, we'll just wait for a few seconds, and if not, then we'll move. Should we move on to the question answer session then for a bit? And if Soumya comes back, I've messaged her. If she comes back, then we'll go over to her to conclude her presentation. Yeah, Anandini?
That sounds good. So due to this sort of tech glitch, I'll request Dr. Yogesh Snehi, the Deputy Dean of the Research and Consultancy Division at Ambedkar University, Delhi, to please come in here and summarize some of the questions that we have received on YouTube as well as on the chat here, and post them to the 2 speakers who are here right now. And then when Dr. Uma returns, we'll take up her conclusion.
Thank you very much, Anandini. These have been very interesting set of presentations, and I thank all the 3 panelists for sharing their ideas with us here today. Is Professor Honey O'Broy around? I can't see her. Yes, she's here.
I'm there. Yeah.
For the first set of questions will be to Professor Honey O'Broy, and few of these are actually comments. So I'm sharing those comments also, and actually then I will also share the concrete question that the participant has asked. This is Tenzing Dorje, who thinks that empathy leads to involvement, and therefore a researcher may get biased when attempting particularly survey-based research. So if you would want to respond to that, then it's fine. But otherwise, the concrete question comes here from Vedamini Vikram Singh, who has asked, I'm just reading it for you. How can we train ourselves to change that practice of academic writing? And how do we reconcile with the needs of industry that employs us which is often not as liberal as accommodative of emotions, where she's actually asked this question with reference to your comment on history should not be linear and they should include emotions. While on the other hand, when we go to, she refers to here to employers. It seems that she is a working person. So with reference to employers, this is not something which is expected from an employee, where emotion do not necessarily become, is not something worthy enough to be expressed, worthy enough to be as evidence. So, Hani, this is for you.
Has the screen got? Oh yeah.
Hani, would you want to respond to it?
Could you unmute?
Yeah. Just very briefly, because we are running out of time. First, to Sering's question, I would just say that, as Dr. Uma was saying, that actually pure objectivity is also a myth. And so we are always in the purview of emotions. In some paradigms of research, we acknowledge these and we tend to work with them. And in other paradigms of research, we tend to gloss over them or not look at them. So, I think, yes, empathy can take us to more messy areas in research, but a researcher's training, one would need to be trained into that. And since the 1990s, most paradigms in social science research have now begun to acknowledge the space of empathy and also the space for working through subjectivity. These are not full changes in paradigms that have come about. They are difficult to be accepted. As Vikram's question, the second question is saying that when we are doing research for industry or we are doing research for other purposes through which we are earning our bread and butter, most of the places are not really open to it. So my suggestion would be to begin thinking of mixed methods researches, where part of it can be what the organization needs. And I think Geeta would completely agree with me that numbers also always have their own stories to tell. And if we like, you can look at statistics very much descriptively as well. So this is a false binary that there are some disciplines which are only statistical and some disciplines which are descriptive. But when I was training as a clinical psychologist, I realized that when one was doing surveys or questionnaires, there was very rich possibility to read density of data from the lives of the people we were studying through these surveys as well. So I think it would require a creative way of working through mixed methods to bring in acceptability. And I'm sure the Research and Consultancy Division, as well as the Center of Research Methods, would provide the scholars with opportunities to take up writing workshops on how to write research differently. Yogesh, I think for brevity of time, I will stop here on this question.
Thank you very much, Hani. I will now request Professor Nakiran to respond to actually one set of questions coming from Shreyashi Sen, who comes perhaps from the discipline of criminology. She has asked us that, is research approach for criminology different from sociology? This is her first question that she asks. And then she also goes on to ask whether criminology and sociology are overlapping disciplines, and there is anything that sociological knowledge has to do with criminological research. The second set of questions that she asks is whether researchers' ethics may be compromised in conducting research, and how does a researcher handle such situations while collecting field data? Professor Nakiran? You'll have to unmute.
Yeah. I don't know how many questions I can respond to that. The distinction between criminology and sociology, I don't know whether I'm the right person to respond, because I am not aware of the subject called criminology. I mean, I don't want to say something which may be wrong, but I can say something like this, that every discipline has different ways of approaching a problem. Even within criminology, there may be a psychological way of approaching a problem, an anthropological or sociological way of approaching a problem. Okay, therefore, it may not be a right way of asking this question, whether it is criminology and sociology, how they are interrelated. But the problem you're choosing to study and the way you're intervening into that problem, where do you want to come from? From a sociological angle or a psychological angle. I mean, there was recently a paper by Suganya Shanta on prisoners, on caste within prison. Okay, the purely sociological and anthropological work. So I think it may be important, it may be useful for you to ask that question from the kind of problem you're handling and the kind of lens you would like to use. Other than this, I may not be able to give an exact answer for that. In terms of the second question was, I think, is on researchers' ethics. Maybe I understand something like this, where you feel the researcher herself or himself may be under harm. I don't know that it's the right way of understanding this question. Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, in ethnographic studies, the researcher places herself in the field for a long time. She's alone in an alien environment. So I'm not denying that. But within the research ethics discussion, we don't discuss that. But as an institutional environment, institutional framework, as a faculty members and student interactions, I think these are important things to be discussed. And somewhere there should be a forum where we discuss about these concerns as a part of Center for Research or Research and Consultancy Division. Certainly we can discuss this issue as one of the concerns, including the proctoral division here. Yeah, so I think this should be discussed, but it cannot be, I mean, I don't want to say it should be discussed within the research ethics discussion, right? I hope I understood your question rightly and answered it correctly. Yeah, I think I'll stop here, Yogesh, unless there is something very pressing and which is specific to me, I can certainly respond for the want of time.
Sure. Thank you very much, Nakiran. These are the next set of questions are to Soumya. And actually, some of them are generic, and if Hani and Nakiran both want to respond to them, they can also come. And these follow once again from Siyashi Sen. One of the peculiar questions that she's asking is whether the research in the field of victimology, because these are following questions from criminology, but whether research in the field of victimology be utilized through sociological methods. This is the first question from Soumya. And then the second question from from Shiashi is whether or not researchers may become victim in the process. Now that's an interesting question, actually. Particularly, she's saying where a researcher is working on prisons, or the subjects are people who are in prisons. So maybe Hani may also want to come back to this question, but this is to Soumya. And therefore, how gender can become a limiting factor when a woman researcher is conducting the research. The second set of questions come from Shantanu Maji, and the participant has requested Soumya to share the checklists for inclusion of women's perspective, and that's what the researcher is demanding. I don't know which checklist the student is talking about, but maybe Soumya knows more about it. Over to you, Soumya.
Can I be heard now? Okay, I'm sorry. There was a Wi-Fi connectivity issue, so I had to go back and I couldn't complete my presentation. There were a couple of slides left. So maybe I can, if there is a few minutes, I could do that. But I will answer this question about can researcher become a victim? I think that's a question which uh, Yogesh was raising as one of the questions. Yes, researcher can become a victim. There are times in feminist research where I have seen, the researcher being vulnerable, including myself, being vulnerable, going into a place where there had just been violence, and there are still people who are who have a lot of ill feelings towards each other, and there is a possibility of um, being attacked even. I think every researcher will be the best judge to see, to weigh the risks and to see whether the kind of risks that are going to be posed are manageable or not. Of course, there is a research ethics board which will also be looking at this. But I also want to add that even in those situations where I felt I may be attacked, or where I probably actually was, there was a situation where a man ran after me with a big rock in his hand wanting to attack me. But even in those situations where I look at myself as a victim, I still will be thinking that those participants whom I'm speaking to, they do not have the kind of class privilege or caste privilege which I have. So I'm then less of a victim than them. So I think it's important to also be, even if one feels victimized as a researcher, it's very, very important to be aware of what is our own social, economic, political positioning, and whether that kind of positioning is giving us a certain kind of edge, a certain kind of privilege, which it probably is not giving those, those participants whom one is studying. I think that's where I would leave it for now. Do I have a few minutes to finish the presentation, or Anandini, what would you suggest? If there is no time, that's fine. I can share the I can share the, because I think I finished speaking about the major feminist ethical principles, so I think that's okay. Yogesh, was there any other question which I missed?
Yes, one more comment has come. Actually, I'm just sharing with you, and that is generic comment, which is about given the prevalence of gender disparity, how does a researcher become sensitive and also receptive to the issues of the girl child? So on the one hand, you don't have a environment where a research of this kind is what you call democratically possible. But also at the same time, if a researcher is wanting to do that, how does that set of environment and pedagogy or training can be necessary and desirable?
Yeah. I think part of it is studying the environment itself, going mentally prepared, going after conducting certain kinds of ground level, understanding the dynamics. I think in terms of any kind of research with children, consent becomes an even larger issue. And then when we are talking about girl child, it becomes even larger because we are talking about a combination of age and patriarchy, which plays a role. So then it becomes even more complicated. For example, usually in terms of children, we say that if children are in the care of the parents, parental consent is enough. When we are talking about that is problematic in some sense, because there is an assumption that the parent is the best, is in the best position to know whether the child should talk, not talk, how much to talk, what kind of control. But when we are talking about a girl child, there's also a patriarchal control that comes in, and how exactly are we going to deal with that? And this kind of patriarchal control happens not only for girl children, but it also happens for women. When I've gone into villages and wanted to speak to women, wanted to gather them together for a focus group discussion in one part of the of a village, it is usually the men of the family who will come out, because they are the ones who are used to speaking. For the first time, they feel sidelined, they feel threatened, they feel silenced, because I want to speak to the women and not the men. So these are, and if it is not dealt with in a very, very tactful manner, this can very quickly, it can become something. It can turn into even violence, or it can turn into harassment, and I could be thrown out of the village. How would I deal with that kind of a situation? Very tactfully speaking to the men, listening to them, giving them a bit of time so that they feel that they are heard as well, and then drawing out the women. Women do not want to talk in the presence of men. Very often, feminist research also involves very, very intimate aspects of a person's life. It could be about female sex selective abortions. It could be about cervical cancer, breast cancer. It could be about marital rape or other forms of rape. It could be about honor crimes. So women will not be able to speak freely if they are in the presence of men. So it's also about drawing them out. Sometimes when I've had these focus group discussions with adolescent girls, and with women, men have come and sat there because they wanted to watch what is being talked and what is going on that we as men are not part of. But then once they, first 5-10 minutes, keep it vague, keep it about health, harmless, nothing threatening, and then the men go away. So there are ways, and these are very often, there is no strict rule. These are things that one learns and one acts on the spot. But all that can be provided is some framework of ethics, some framework of values that you keep in mind while you are on the field. But while you're on the field and you are dealing with a particular incident, you are the best judge in that particular situation.
Thanks, Sonia, for a very comprehensive
Thank
response.
you very much, Soumya. Yes. Just a moment, Anandini. If Professor Hani and Professor Nakiran also would want to respond to some of these questions, they are more than welcome to do that. Hani?
Yeah, just something very briefly I would like to say, that I think that this is very true. Also taking from Nakiran's talk, that sometimes, anonymity is what is desirable, and sometimes the participants want us to want a claim to the research that is going on. One faces this all the time in the clinical context, where too the issues of sometimes being touched, being harmed can be present. But I would just like to take up this question otherwise too, that even if the researcher is not directly harmed, research is an activity that is quite intense, and the journeys of most researchers are quite lonely. So I think that when ethics is being thought about, and also when uh, our divisions are thinking about what to happen. There was one response in question that when the researcher goes to the prison context, will one have a breakdown? Will one have, what happens if one collapses into the research? These are very real possibilities. And I think the provision of a peer group to which people can come back to, sound their research, talk to one another, that is very, very crucial. Because so far we always think about ethics from the angle of what the researcher does to others. But one of the line would also have to be what gets done to the researcher in the process, and what the researcher goes through in the process of researching, which is not superficial, but which goes deeply into things. And there I think we need to think about provisions of care for the researcher as part of research ethics. Yeah, that's something I just wanted to bring up from the participants' questions.
Thank you, Hani. Professor Nakiran, would you want to respond to some of the questions here?
I just want to add one comment that every social location, male or female, age-specific location provides. I mean, there are certain locations which is in a patriarchal society, in a kind of the society we are in provides a discriminatory experience and is unfavorably placed. But I just want to add a minor point that equally there are also every social location provides a certain advantage because, for example, being a Dalit provides an access to Dalit community in a more easily, and the acceptance is better. Likewise, being a male doing research on, say, birth control or child care, you face a disadvantage in facing that. So I think that there are, of course, there are certain vulnerable positions for certain researchers, but there are also certain dimensions which provides certain advantages. Like every position will have its own advantage in terms of access, in terms of community acceptance. Yeah, and in terms of being placed in an awkward situation, I think most of us face such kind of situation. For example, you as a health researcher, you end up having private to somebody saying that an underage marriage or sex selective abortion happened. Somebody with there's a patient who is HIV positive. How do you respond to that? I think these are all we end up facing the situation, and research guidelines may not give answers to all these problems. I think we through negotiation, through maybe consulting some more informed people, I think we handle those situations.
Thank you. Soumya, you want to respond to it? Please go ahead.
I don't particularly want to respond to what Professor Nakiran was saying, but I just wanted to add one point which hasn't come up so far, which is about doing research in COVID times. And I think there is a lot of research which is happening about the COVID impact. So I think it's there are some protocols which are being formulated, because a lot of it is happening through phone, through internet. So what kind of consent are we talking about? How do we make sure that all the ethical values that we are talking about, how do we make sure that those are applicable in a situation where we are not face to face with the participant, but we are doing this research through through other means, through electronic means or through phone. So I think the COVID impact related research is bringing out a whole set of questions and a whole set of dilemmas which need to be looked at. It's possible that within AUD, some of the research scholars may be wanting to, or they may be involved in this. So I think that's something that requires a bit of thinking through as well.
Thank you very much, Soumya, Professor Nakiran and Hani. Over to you, Anandini, now.
Thank you, Yogesh. Thank you, all the speakers for addressing the questions in such a very quick and critical way, and of course adding some new perspectives as well that suggest opportunities for further webinars. I think this is just one of the first that we've thought of around ethics, and a lot of food for thought for us. I'll not take too much time, just ask Kritika to offer the vote of thanks, and we'll conclude after that.
Thank you, Anandini. As we move to the end of today's webinar, on behalf of the Research and Consultancy Division and the Center for Research Methods, I would like to extend a warm vote of thanks to all our speakers, Professor Hani Oberoi Wahali, Professor Nakiran, Dr. Soumya Uma. Thank you for the very engaging and thought-provoking presentations, and of course, answering the Q&A session. I'm sure that all the participants present on Zoom and YouTube would have found the webinar interesting and extremely useful. A heartfelt thanks to all our participants for their active involvement. We are sharing the link of the feedback form on the Zoom chat as well as the YouTube. You're requested to fill it carefully. Your email address should be correct because the e-certificate will directly go to your email address. Thank you. Over to you, Nandini.
Kritika, you forgot to give the link for the Shodhotsav report.
That we'll do via email, because since it's only for AUD people, then
fine.
non-AUD people will find it a little annoying that they are not able to view it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Wonderful being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
I hope
Thanks.
we have you back physically also when times allow.
I look forward to that, and I look forward to working together on these issues.
Yeah.
So
And thanks for posting the references as well. So participants, please do take note of that in the chat.
I think Kritika will also put it in YouTube, right?
Yeah, even Ramesh is putting it on YouTube, so it'll be there.
Okay, then.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.